Okay, so hopefully before you watch this video, you read the article about cancer. So the question was just how would you explain why one person gets cancer and another person doesn't? So you read the article, hopefully you kind of figured out what it was. So the reason I wanted you guys to start with that is because what we're really thinking about is how does variation get into our gene pool? Where do the differences between different people come from? And so there's really three causes for that. The first cause would be, which traits are you actually getting? So meiosis happens and you have one trait from mom and one trait from dad, and only one of those traits is going to be given to each gamete. So remember the whole independent assortment thing. They're going to go into different gametes. All right, the next way that variation or differences in organisms occurs is through replication errors, which was what you guys just read about. They think that up to 60% of cases of cancer are actually due to replication errors. And replication, just a reminder of chapter 12, is when you are actually copying your DNA. So when that happens, there's typically a few errors that happen, and the more that that DNA is copied, the more likely it is to have errors in it. And then the third condition would be when you have the DNA changing because of environmental or exposure conditions. So this would be mutations. So really, both of these last ones are talking about mutations. So that's what this video is going to be about. So when a cell makes a mistake when it's copying, or if the DNA changes, so basically if the DNA of an individual changes, then you have a mutation. Okay, so it's just a change in the genetic material of a cell. So there's different types of changes. So there's different ways the DNA can change. There's different reasons that the DNA changes. And there's also different impacts on the organism. Good impacts, bad impacts, neutral impacts. So that's what we're going to outline here. So in terms of mutations, so when the DNA changes, whether because of environmental conditions or whether just because of an error made in replication, there's two main types. There's mutations that happen on the gene level, which basically means in terms of the sequence, the sequence of bases. And then there's also this idea of chromosome mutations. So when bits of chromosomes or entire chromosomes are either inserted where they're not supposed to be or not put in where they're supposed to be. All right. So in terms of types of mutations, we're going to start with the gene mutations first. So again, these are the ones about the sequences of DNA. So point mutations are kind of like a category within gene mutations. So point mutations are where you're only having a change in one or a few nucleotides. So this is like your before, and then this is your before DNA, all right, your original. And then there's these different types of point mutations. So in a substitution, just like you think of the word substitute teacher, this was supposed to be a C, but a T was put in instead. So that's a substitution mutation. You can also see down here, highlighted in green, those are all representing the amino acid sequences. So when you have a substitution, notice that only one amino acid has the possibility of changing. Now an insertion is a little bit trickier because when you're just inserting this new piece of this new nucleotide, even though it's only one, that shifts the codon. Remember, the ribosome reads in pairs of 3. So when you are inserting, you're now changing the codon, which results in, look right here, 3 different amino acids. So the protein is significantly more different. This next one is the opposite, but it kind of has a similar impact. So here we got rid of the G nucleotide, and because of that, it has shifted our sequence of bases, and that also resulted in a change in our amino acids. Okay, so when you see this idea of a frame shift, what that means is that the frame that reads the 1, 2, 3 bases in a codon, it's now off. And from the rest of the point on in the gene, it will be off. So those are obviously, these ones are going to be result in bigger changes. Okay, so now we'll look at chromosomal mutations. And again, we're going to see some similar vocabulary. So deletion, so if this is your original chromosome, a deletion you can see right here, we lost the B portion. So that has been deleted. Duplication, we've now got 2 B sections of the chromosome. So now keep in mind that if we're looking at a chromosome here, these sections would be genes. So it's not just going to be one gene. A chromosome mutation is going to impact multiple genes, because there's way more than just like the 6 letters that are shown here. There's a lot of genes on any given chromosome. So if a chunk of chromosome is deleted or duplicated or whatever, it is going to change change more significantly on the organism. So inversions occur when sections of the DNA are mismatched in terms of their order. So that's going to cause some problems in terms of meiosis and crossing over, because what if it was to cross over at this point? So the A and the C come up here, the A and the B come down there. This one individual at the bottom, because keep in mind, each chromosome is only one copy of each chromosome gets passed down in meiosis. But this individual has now got an A, 2 copies of B, and no copies of C, if this was to switch. This individual up here is going to have A and then 2 C's, but no B's. So you can see now their offspring would end up with basically either a deletion or a duplication. Or really both, a deletion and a duplication. So translocation is when part of one chromosome, so we have this like additional piece that is not part of the original chromosome, it's now attached here, which basically means you're going to have extra copies of those genes, and you can also see that it has significantly changed the original chromosome. So again, when this person goes through meiosis, if this chromosome were to get passed down to an offspring, now they're going to have extra copies of this, and if crossing over happens, you could end up losing parts of the genetic code. Okay, we move from the ways that mutations happen, like the different types of mutations. Now we're going to move into what can cause these changes or these mutations, what can cause them, and then we'll also talk about what the possible impacts are on an organism. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is this idea that we said that mutations can occur spontaneously. I think they accept that maybe like 3 base pairs are changed each time your DNA is copied. Okay, so that's really quite a lot of changes. Mutagens, mutagen is a word that basically means it is a substance or agent that can cause mutations. So you probably have noticed if you've ever had an x-ray that you wear like the lead cover. and that is just blocking you from the intense energy in the X-ray, so that you are not, so that you're not mutating your cells. Certain chemicals can have mutagenic effects or can cause mutations, and another big one would be UV radiation. So UV radiation, you guys know, comes from the sun, and it can be very damaging to your DNA. It can cause certain types of mutations. Like right here, we'll get there. So chemicals, we just said chemicals can interfere with the DNA strand, and so pesticides, tobacco, pollutants, and then radiation. So when we looked at the X-ray and the UV rays, so that can change the DNA, basically because it causes two thymines that are on the same strand of DNA, like notice they're attached to the same backbone. They bond together, which means that they're not bonding over here. It causes a kink in the DNA, and that causes problems during replication, and really even during transcription and translation. Okay, so we've now talked about types of mutations. We've talked about causes of mutations. So lastly, we'll look at how mutations can impact an organism. So the first thing to understand is that not all mutations are bad. Mutations are the things that are giving variety to a species. So really, red hair, blue eyes, all of those things at some point in human history were mutations. So really, if you think about it logically, there's only 3 outcomes for a mutation. It can have a positive impact on a person, or sorry, not a person, but on an organism, because mutations happen in things that aren't people too. It can have a neutral or no impact, or it can have a negative impact, like when it causes a disease, like we talked about ALD in your chapter 13 project. But a lot of mutations that happen, even though they might change the DNA, they don't always result in a change in the protein. Or maybe the change in the protein is so slight that it doesn't really change its function. And then of course there can be some mutations that are a positive impact, like having a increased bone density, or if you are an insect or a plant being resistant to pesticides, that's going to allow you to survive further. The pictures are just some different kinds of mutations. Like for example, this is a wild banana. So you can see the seeds, they're very large. The fruit isn't so large, but we have kind of mutated it, and this is the banana that we eat. So we kind of appreciate that. But here is probably what you think of more when you think of a mutation. Now, the other thing that kind of impacts how much it impacts an organism is what type of cell has the mutation occurred in. So if a mutation occurs in a body cell, so if it occurs like somewhere in your finger, that's not going to get passed down. Like it'll impact you and it'll impact your finger, but it's not going to be something that gets passed down to your children. Okay, so if a mutation happens in your body cell, it's only going to impact direct descendants, direct cell descendants. Now, on the other hand, let's say that a mutation happens in your egg cell. That may not impact you, okay, because it's your egg cell and that's not really like crucial for your survival. But if that's the egg cell that gets fertilized and creates a new human being, then that mutation will get passed down to the offspring with whatever kind of impact it has, whether it's positive, neutral, or negative.